California. Welcome to LSB Feasters Radio Channel, where we keep great radio from the past alive. And I am so glad you are here today, because I got something special. If you're a WLS fan, you're going to love this. It's WLS Unwound, Personalities of the Music Radio Years. WLS presented a 2-hour special about its music radio history that aired on July 26, 2025. It was hosted by WLS historian Scott Childers, and WLS Unwound featured appearances from Tommy Edwards, Chuck Knapp, Catherine Johns, Chuck Buell, Jim Kerr. Yeah, a lot of people didn't even realize Jim Kerr spent time on WLS, but he did. And many others, too, as they talked about the station's time as the Rock of Chicago and shared stories about what happened at the station behind the scenes. The show was produced by my friend Ted Gordon Smucker, Bill Shannon, Tim Larson, Travis Bravo, and another friend of mine who I worked with at WDBO in Orlando, Kipper McGee. So if you're ready to do some reminiscing, here we go. It's WLS Unwound, Personalities of the Music Radio Years, Part 1.
This is 890 WLS AM Chicago, 94.7 WLS FM HD2 Chicago, a Cumulus media station. Ladies and gentlemen, broadcasting from the NBC Tower from a place we call Chicago, it's time to explore those tender moments of yesteryear. Join us as we delve into another exciting episode of those who lived and loved their jobs at the Big 89 during the vintage days of rock and roll radio. I'm Jeff Davis, and I used to work here too. Anyway, it's WLS Unwound, Personalities of the Music Radio Years. Stay with us as we listen to the folks that made the Rock of Chicago legendary for music in the Midwest. Here's your host, WLS historian and author, and a man with his own jingle, Scott Childers.
Scott Childers.
And a great Saturday night, live from high atop the downtown Illy, in this case, here at NBC Tower. It's Scott Childers and a cast of hundreds here at the radio station. Wow.
Yeah.
Telling you what, we have got 2 hours of absolute fun. So let's introduce who's here. Right here to my left, you know him as part of the Animal Stories news team. Tommy Edwards.
Snot-nosed Tommy.
Little snot-nosed Tommy.
Right. And I prefer to be called Ted Peacock. But nonetheless, I'm here, and it's been such a long time since I've been in this radio station. They've moved the bathroom, so I'm in big trouble.
They moved the whole place.
Yeah.
And then we have 2 Chucks, no waiting. I see we have Chuck Knapp and Chuck Buell.
Big Chuck and Little Chuck.
Yeah, what?
Well, we'll have to decide that after the broadcast.
Yeah, you got the Chuck and bookends right here.
I like it. Over to my right is the First Lady of News, Catherine Johns.
I am thrilled to be here, and like the rest of you, it's been a long time since I've been at this radio station, or frankly, any other. So we'll see how this goes.
It's a career, your career just drops after you leave here. So.
Yeah, sure did.
Well, speaking of a long time, over 50 years since he's been here. He was here for a little while and then ended up going to New York and has been on the air continuously for the last 50 years, a Radio Hall of Famer as well.
That's right.
Please say hello to Jim Kerr. Hi, Jim.
Hey. It was 51 years. 51 years.
Counting.
Yeah, 51 years since Tommy waved goodbye. Little Tommy was my boss, and he waved goodbye.
Yeah, well, I remember when I brought you up. You were down in the FM station.
I know, and he actually made it possible for me to be here at WLS, and he made it possible for me to move on from WLS within the company. But I was on Saturday night at 10. That was my show.
So this is your show.
So this is my time.
And you were on the world famous WLS float, St. Patrick's Day float.
Yes, I was.
The day before you started in New York.
Yes, I was.
That's amazing.
I had to leave the parade and go to O'Hare.
It's unreal. Yeah.
And unlike most of the people in this room, Jim, you actually were on the air this week. So you had to come in after being on the radio.
Yesterday morning. Yeah.
Yesterday morning, right. That's what I mean. Yeah. So, well, we've got a wonderful evening of recollection and a lot of great audio. And that's really thanks to our producers, Bill Shannon, as well as Ted Gordon Smucker, that found some of this stuff. But I just want to go around the room first. For those who know about my background, and I've been here at WLS for about, on and off the last 5 years. I'm mainly part-time and fill-in, but I was a mainstay at 360, being the one that looked through the glass, and it's thanks to most of these people that are in this room that I'm in this business, and I say that sincerely. So you know where my inspiration came from. But Tommy, I want to talk to you, because you have a wonderful book out, and it really goes through your career and how you got here and what you did afterwards. But give us a little thumbnail sketch about that.
About what? The book?
About how you got here.
Oh, how I got here. Well, I grew up in Topeka, Kansas, and I was always listening to the radio. And my favorite disc jockey was a guy named Curtis, okay? And let's see, I can't remember, what was the first name? Anyway, he turned out to be Bill Curtis, okay? And he was, the reason I liked him is because he was unlike any of the other disc jockeys was on the air. He had something to say. He would be talking about certain things. You could tell he was really intelligent. He was at Washburn University Law School, I guess, when he was also doing this. And then he moved to CBS and became one of the big shots of CBS News. But he was my hero. So I always thought if I could do anything, I would love to be like Bill Curtis. And that's who I listened to.
He was and continues to be amazing.
Yeah.
And an anchorman and a guy that can be so serious. And Catherine, you understand this from being on the news side. I mean, he could be so serious, but he also knew how to make fun and be light. And that's one of the things you had to really learn working with Larry and then later with Fred.
Oh, yeah. They were light for sure. And it was fun. I had done all news radio before I came here. So it was quite a switch doing a show with a jock. And we did pretty straight news. When I first got here, Jeff and I co-anchored the news, and we were serious about it. And then one day they called us into the general manager's office and said, we'd like Larry to interface with the news people. Now, y'all know Larry. How much do you think he liked the idea of interfacing? Yeah, not at all. But that changed everything. That was really the beginning of the ensemble morning show. And it was so much fun.
I was going to say, and you guys went to London, you went to Disney World, you went to so many places, too, which if you were just stuck in the newsroom, you probably wouldn't have been able to go.
Oh, probably not. Yeah. No, it was great being part of that show.
Let's talk to the Chucks. Let's talk to Chuck Knapp and talk about some of your experiences before you came to the Big 89.
So I came from the edge of the prairie, out at the Lake Agassiz Basin, right there in western Minnesota, a long ways from downtown Chicago. I'm a sophomore in high school, and I hear that a station in Chicago has changed from a prairie station to a rock station. And I started listening when I was a sophomore to WLS, never thinking that I would get into broadcasting or never thinking that 7.5 years later I would wind up at this radio station. And it's always a thrill to come back to the rock of Chicago. Just really a tremendous honor.
Yeah, and we're so glad you're here. And the other Chuck, left Chuck and right Chuck. If you're listening in stereo, I think on the stream you can tell.
Yeah, of course. I feel like I'm listening to some of these stories because a lot of these stories were after I was there. I'm wondering if Jim and I were the older guys of this whole thing because a lot of these personalities, Edwards and the rest of them, came after I was there. When I first started listening to this station, I was in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I was in junior high. In 9th grade, I had my first radio show, and I used to listen to WLS because we could get it with its 50,000 watts of power. And I would listen to Ron Riley, and I would listen to Art Roberts, who I thought were great. And I thought, man, I'd like to do that there someday. So what I would do briefly is I would listen to Ron Riley. I would write down all of his clever remarks about his invention for people who like to stretch their points and get a rubber pencil. And I would do that the next day on my show. I heard Art Roberts do the stuff that he did, and here's the thing. I stole a line from him just because I didn't understand it. When he said, "This has been a work of art," I thought, well, that's classy. That's a clever way of saying that, you did a decent show. And I used to use that until one day, out of the blue, it snapped. He says that because his name is Art.
Yeah, this has been a work of Chuck.
Now, Jim, I heard a story. I did a little research, and I was told that when you worked here on the FM, when WLS FM was WDAI, that you actually hitchhiked from Michigan to get here.
Yeah, it was a Sunday night, and it was cold. And I arrived here in Chicago about 4 o'clock in the morning on the first Monday of January, 1972. And I went to a restaurant called the Little Corporal and sat at like a counter that they had in the center of the restaurant, where I drank lots and lots of coffee until it was time for the radio station offices to open up. And I went over to 360 North Michigan Avenue. And I went into the WDAI lobby, and I said hello to the secretary there, whose name was Phyllis. And I said I wanted to see the program director because I heard they had an opening, and I brought my tape with me. And I had to hitchhike because there was no time to get the tape to the PD in time.
Well, that makes sense.
Because I was told there's an opening. Yeah. They're going to make a decision
you got
real soon.
Right.
So the only way that I could get the tape was to just bring it myself. So I brought the tape. I went in and spoke to the program director, Steve Stafford, and then the general manager, Leonard Cohen. Not that Leonard Cohen, a different Leonard Cohen. And they hired me. I was flabbergasted. They hired me.
You were waiting for a no and you got a yes.
Yeah, well, I was just hoping to be heard. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up doing the morning show there at WDAI from January until, when was it? It was January 72 to March of 73.
Yeah.
When Tommy came in, and he had a different plan for me.
Yeah. And, was Jim Davis also the program director when you were?
Jim Davis succeeded Steve Stafford.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And so he was the program director, and he was your colleague at WOR-FM in New York.
Yeah, right. And so he got out here before I did, but we both were at a radio station, ORFM in New York City. And it was starting to change, and things were a little bit different. And so the first thing that happened was that Jim got a job in Chicago at WDAI. And then Mike McCormick called me and said, "Come on, I want to talk to you." So I flew into Chicago and had a couple of meetings with him and the general manager, Paul Abrams. And went back to New York and waited for a phone call, and eventually came in and said, "Okay," and we made a deal, and that was it.
And Tommy, as the program director, brought in Bob Surratt from WBBM FM and Yvonne Daniels from WSDM, and they came in as full-time people. Bob was 10 o'clock at night,
right,
and then Yvonne was the overnight person. I was the first of the FM people that he brought over. But, his plan was that I would be the weekend and fill-in guy. I was the youngest among that group. But for the first, I guess, 5 or 6 weeks, I did 10 to 2 at night because we were waiting for Bob to be able to come over. Mm-hmm. And then later on, when Charlie Van Dyke left and Fred moved to mornings and Bob moved to afternoons, Steve King came to us from WNAP in Indianapolis. And those were Tommy's hires.
Yeah, well, Steve was also at BBM FM. So I took Steve King, Bob Surratt, Yvonne Daniels from SDM, and the music director.
Yeah, Jim Smith.
Jim Smith, who was the music director of BBM. I think the reason for that really was I had come from New York and I was at an FM station, and we were starting to really get into the ratings, trying to take them away from WABC, which is the enormous, big, huge radio station. And I realized when I got to Chicago, the biggest problem that WLS was going to have was erosion for FM. And so we had to do everything possible to keep people from tuning into FM. And FM had some personalities. Yvonne, we had, and Bob Surratt at WBBM. And Steve King was also sounding terrific. And the music over at BBM was great. So when things caused certain people to leave WLS, I called BBM, and I called the individuals, to the point where the general manager called me one day and asked if he could come over too.
Was that John Catlett?
Yes, true story. And that's basically how that all the whole team got together.
Amazing how that happened.
And Larry was over at CFL.
At CFL, and we are going to talk about that yet, but we do have to take a break. But before we do, let's talk about let's take a listen to one of the people that we've talked about who was here at the beginning, one of the original Swingin' Seven, and that's Bob Hale.
Hi there, I'm Bob Hale from the original WLS crowd way back in it was back there then. Midnight shows. I'm talking midnights now. Midnight, it was a 4-person operation. You had the guy who sat out under the towers, where it's Tri-State Toll Road now. Tinley Park, one man there, one man in the studio control room, one man spinning the records. Okay, that's 3 guys, and then you got the disc jockey, and so there you are with your crew of 5 or 6 people, and most of the audience say, "Gee, I wonder what it's like to be alone and working a radio show at that hour." Well, for those of us in Chicago, we were never alone. The second, third, fourth wave of disc jockeys that came along, when they first come into Chicago and take your place at a station like WLS, and it happens all over the country, the guys who were there at point 1 and now at point 2 or 3 look back and say, "Oh my gosh, they just don't have it." Well, of course they had it, or they wouldn't have got to Chicago, but they had it in a different way. And every busload of new disc jockeys, whether they come in a busload or one at a time, has a different style, a different way, a different approach. And that's what holds the audience. And that second wave, third wave of disc jockeys that came to WLS, they built a heck of a big, solid audience. Now, we did have a big crowd listening to us, but the next bunch of guys that came along, they really build up an audience, and I applaud them for that.
Wow, there you go, Bob Hale. We're going to hear more from him and some of the original disc jockeys that were here at WLS as they debuted back in 1960. We got to take a break. More coming up from WLS Unwound.
Now back to WLS Unwound. Personalities of the Music Radio Years. Right here on the Big 89 WLS. Where else?
And one of the biggest Beatlemaniacs we had here in the 60s was Ron Ringo Riley. Let's take a listen.
Hi, Ron Riley here, and nice to have you with us. A lot of fun. Remember the oldies. And one of the oldies I remember was Clark Webber, and everybody used to say, "Riley, say something bad about Webber." Well, got something kind of bad about him. Believe it or not, Clark was a pilot. Yeah, I thought he'd pilot here and pilot there. Well, he decided that we were going to fly together to this hop we were doing in Indiana, and I said, "Clark, I would rather ride 2 hours than fly in 15 minutes with you." He said, "Oh, let's go. So it was okay going down there. Coming back, though, we got the idea that we were going to mess around. And I said, "Clark, let's just get back to Chicago." And Clark said, "Hey, there's a train down there. Watch this, just like World War II. And he put nose down, and we followed it all along the top of freight cars. And he was going, tat, 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 tat. I said, "Get out!" Well, we made it back home, and the last time I ever flew in an airplane with that joker, or even rode in a car. Say something bad about Weber? Well, that was bad.
You know, Clark Webber actually had a pretty good idea there because, you know, if you gave him flack on the ground, he'll take you up for a little flight. And that could be kind of an issue, wouldn't it? That's for sure. We're in the middle of our WLS Unwound, and just before we went to the break, we were talking about the jocks that got things started here when we went to rock and roll May 2nd, 1960, and Bob Surratt actually did a great little montage when they moved from the old studio into the new studio back in 1976, and I know, Tommy, you were here at that point. Let's take a listen to that, and we can talk about it after it's finished.
At any rate, though, if you've ever gotten rid of a car that you had for a long time, even though the darn thing doesn't work right anymore, and you get attached to it, and you hate to see it go. Well, that's the case here with Old Studio A. And we got to thinking, if you could go into a radio time machine and tune around and hear some of the sounds of the past 16 years in this old studio, what would you hear? It's almost like that old Twilight Zone show. Do you remember the show where some guy finds an old radio and he plays with it and he gets the old-time radio shows out of it? Well, that's what we're going to do right now. Let me switch it on and let's go back in time.
Current increase in the range is the first...
10 o'clock. It's a good time for the good sound of summer on the Art Roberts Show.
There's the one with the boing boing. Well, we have our guest team disc jockey to introduce to you right now, and as usual, we'll do it by reading a little bit of the letter that we got in. It was letter number 4.
They're setting up.
WLS has presented with portions pre-recorded Newscope from Chicago. Stay tuned now for The Ron Riley Show.
WLS, the station with personality.
Oh, what a day. It's been one of those days, you know. I mean, really.
Increase in the...
On top of a pizza, all covered with cheese.
Both are
Officially 4 degrees in Chicago. It's 4 o'clock.
It's a good time for the good sound of Chicagoland 65 on the Dex Card Show.
Current increase in the range is the first...
Good morning, everybody. That's that happening story from the top 89 of 1967. Our time is now 8:21. LS year-end review time on the Clark Weber Show. 28 degrees, and don't you forget it, that starting Monday, January 1st, you can hear Bernie Allen 1 hour earlier, beginning at 10 a.m. on 890.
Tell us most music time, Chuck Buell on a Sunday night, baby. Pull up your popcorn, soda pop, or whatever. Sit back and gaze upon it. You're in it. The second out of 89 in a row.
Current increase in the range.
8:51, WLS Most Music Time with Chris Stevens. Stick your face right up close to the radio now, honey. And I will stick a hit in your ear. Especially for you, baby. Turtles.
Current increase in the range is the first...
Next week, we're going to take some of this old studio with us across the hall, and the beat will go on, LS.
The beat goes on.
So, Chuck Buell, Chuck Knapp, I want to ask you, when I listened to that, it sounded bigger than life. Did it feel bigger than life to you guys when you were here in the studio?
It's the hot seat. It's where everything happened. Being on at night, I could talk to a guy in New York, pick up the next phone call, and it would be a guy in San Francisco. A third call would be from an oil worker in the Gulf of Mexico, and another one would be from somewhere up in the Arctic and way up in Canada. That was the audience at night on WLS. You bet it was a hot seat.
I got a call one night from somebody that said, Chuck, there's somebody calling you off the coast of Vietnam on an aircraft carrier, and they want to talk to you.
Wow.
That's what I said. I said, okay. So I went on the phone, and these guys are so far. We yelled at each other to be able to hear each other. Now, the story was that I got afterwards is these guys worked in the ship's radio shack. They strung antenna up all the way around so they could get LS from Chicago while they were over there. And then when they called, this is now way before internet and all that. So their call went from their ship to, I think, a satellite, and then came back down, hit the land, went on a landline across Asia, and they sent it back up to another satellite, and then they sent it down somewhere in the States, and they fed it to Chicago, and then they fed it from wherever it landed here in Chicago to the regular hard lines, and then they sent it to us where we were, too. Wow.
That's absolutely amazing. One of the great sponsors of the all-night show is Grand Spalding Dodge.
Mr. Norm.
And it's a great, Mr. Norm. Yeah. And there was a story that we got from Grand Spalding Dodge that a father and a son from South America flew up to Chicago, bought a car at Grand Spalding Dodge and drove it back home to South America.
Yeah, true.
That is the power of advertising.
Did they pick up some Heilman's old style?
They probably did.
They had to.
All right, we got to take a break, but coming up, we're going to talk to somebody that Tommy knows very well. We're going to talk about good old Uncle Lair. That is next on WLS Unwound.
We're back with more WLS Unwound. Personalities of the music radio years. That pretty well says it right there. WLS.
In 1973 is when I first came to Chicago and WLS. And after I talked to the boss and everything, Larry Lujack was on the air, but he only had a week to go before his contract expired and he went over to WCFL. So I walked into the studio with him and I just said, "Hi there, Larry. My name is Tommy Edwards." And I put my hand out and he said, "You're the guy from New York." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I don't shake hands from people from New York." And I just looked at him, and and then he just turned his head, and I'm like, "Oh, jeez." So I left. Now, that was the beginning of my meeting with Larry Lujack. I became such great friends with Larry over the years, and even up to the point of when we lost him, when I had phone calls with him, and he was going through such terrible things. And he just needed to talk to somebody and get things out and all that stuff. But I felt so bad for him. And anyway, when Judy called that night and she was crying and she told me what had happened, and it's just something I can still remember, and I just wish I could forget. Anyway, but when he was on the air, nothing got in to the point where he became embarrassed or thought, "What am I going to do with this?" He shared whatever problem he had on the air with the audience, like this.
WLS. Larry Lujack, 248. WLS, souvenir from 1970. Whoops, what is wrong with that? Okay, that's Dusty Springfield. Dusty, you have another drink. We'll have slam number 45 in there, John. Time out on the field, a malfunction in our cheap equipment. More music, WLS. Larry Lujack at WLS. I may file a grievance in the union. I don't have to put up with cruddy equipment like this.
And he was so off the cuff and right away, and he knew what to do. We were talking about a story you had mentioned before we went on the air about a commercial tag that he was supposed to read that he couldn't find.
That's right. I mean, we had paper copies of every commercial we had to read live, and there were a ton of live commercials. Anyway, so there was some tags to some commercials, and he was, he was on the air, and he played a commercial for a movie that was opening up, and so then the commercial ends, and you hear Lujack going, "Wait a minute, I think I'm supposed to say something after that. Oh, God. Wait a minute. No, that's not it. I mean, maybe it's down here in the trash can. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, I think I found it. Now playing."
And Catherine, what was it like? Was it intimidating to work with Lair after hearing him on the air all those years and then to be in the studio with him?
No, he was really welcoming. Like he was so generous about sharing the spotlight. And I know that kind of goes against his image because he pretended to be a hard ass all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But I really was able to develop as a personality because Larry, if we had something worth saying, he would take the whole spotlight of the morning show and shine it on Jeff or on me or on Les and let us have those moments. And of course, he always had the funniest line about them. There was that. But I learned to be a personality and not just a newsreader working with Larry.
And I think it empowered you as well, because I can remember several occasions where he would make a mistake or he would read something and it's wrong, and you'd just go, "Yeah, nice going, Larry." And he would just laugh. He would love that.
Yeah.
He'd love that.
Yeah, and he was great to work with.
When jocks get off the air, they generally just come down, back to the lounge and they relax a little bit and think, "Okay, I hope I had a good show today." Lujack would go back to the lounge and spend the rest of the day planning for tomorrow's show. He'd be reading the newspapers, and he would always write out little reminders of certain things. And when he would come into work the next day, he had all of this material that he had written out on small little notes, and then he would bring them into the show. And it was just incredible the amount of work and dedication that he put into every single show. It was remarkable.
This is before the internet. This is before having Google in front of us. You had to do all of this work beforehand.
Oh my gosh, he would hate having all the internet and the Google. And yeah, I can imagine some of the things he'd say about Google. Anyway, that was just the one. His number one high-tech machine was a fax machine that provided him with copy. Where he could actually send a letter. He used to send letters to my son complaining that, basketball, because I did the public address for the Bulls for so many years. And he would be complaining about the way the game is and all this other stuff. And he'd write them out on that typewriter of his, which is over at the Museum of Communications. And that's how he would communicate. And that was his high-tech thing.
And I would see when I would come up to the station when I was younger and a listener, and I would see all of the reams of paper from the teletype. Mm-hmm. He would get in at like 3 a.m. just to go through the teletype and find what he could find and what he needed.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. He just and he would make notes along and see, this is where kind of how animal stories started. And I'm not sure if you want to get into that right now.
I think we're going to talk about the clunk letter first. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that before we play it.
He got a lot of mail. I mean, Larry Lujack was the number one disc jockey to get mail at that radio station. And it was a lot of people who would be saying, can I get your autograph or this or that? And Animal Stories was a different thing. But sometimes people would have complaints or about the radio station or about Lujack. And he would get the clunk letter of the day.
Larry Lujack, clunk letter of the day. Comes from a girl who does not sign her name. Her initials are TM. Dear Larry, comma. I am 16. Well, right off the bat, I lost half my listeners. They dialed out. I am 16 and have just broken up with my boyfriend. Now I lost the rest of them. Before, I wasn't sure, but after many sleepless nights, I found myself discussing the matter thoroughly with my friends, and we have come to the final and fair conclusion that it was definitely all his fault. It wasn't so bad at first. I mean, I didn't mind staying home on Saturday nights watching TV while he went out drinking with the guys. But I had my fill when, after 5 months of so-called steady dating, he nonchalantly, during a pep assembly, walked out onto the gym floor at school and in front of all those people screamed out, "I'm Perry Mason! Give me a case!" At first I found this rather humorous, but now I find it so repulsive that when I think of this whole thing is repulsive, and I'm not even going to read the rest of the letter. I recall last week definitely making the statement that I wanted exactly 0 letters concerning these teenage love affairs. I got a lot of bad comment on the last one I read. Because, you see, girl, whoever you are, TM, to the rest of the audience, this is just plain sickening. This is just real garbage. They don't care. I'm not running a bubblegum jelly bean teeny bop operation here. I'm programming to adults and sophisticated, intelligent high school and college students and mature second graders, and they just don't want to hear this, nor do I. I mean, we can all sympathize with you because we were all 16 once and had the same problems, and our love problems were just as dumb as yours, but we don't want to hear about them. We don't want to be reminded, especially in the dinner hour for some people. To give you an idea of just how sickening this sounds to everybody in the audience, I'm going to play a song here that was number 1 in 1960. That was 10 years ago, and you were only 6, so you probably don't remember this. But listen to the words, and we find
your letter just about as sickening as this next song.
Super Jockey! Teen Angel.
Oh, jeez.
Teen Angel.
You know, he would get letters from his listeners, obviously, but he would also get letters from celebrities, too. He got an invitation. We got an invitation to come down to Governor Jim Thompson's Christmas party down in Springfield. And we thought, oh, that was great. Now, Governor Thompson just walked in on us one day when we were doing animal stories, and which was a different story. We'll tell you about that later. But anyway, we got this letter saying, why don't you two guys come down to Springfield? I'd like to be a guest of honor for our Christmas party. And he goes, there's no way we're coming down there. He says, look, you know how long it takes to drive down to Springfield, Illinois? You know that you'll probably be eating all the candy and the goodies and drinking all the punch and stuff like that. By the time we get there, there won't be anything. No way. And then he'd rip up the invitation. So that was the clunk letter, and that's how he treated letters.
Unbelievable. Absolutely amazing. Well, we will talk more about animal stories and a little more. And we're also going to talk about some of the unsung heroes in the background, too. The engineers and the producers and some of the great original songs that they came up with here. WLS Unwound continues here next on 890 WLS.
This is 890 WLS AM Chicago. 94.7 WLS FM HD2 Chicago. A Cumulus media station.
Hello, we're still here. Welcome back to WLS Unwound. Personalities of the music radio years, reliving it as if it were yesterday. Just don't ask me what I did this morning. That I don't remember.
WLS.
And let's hear from one of our WLS alumni that was not able to join us tonight, and that is Charlie Van Dyke.
Charlie Van Dyke in the morning.
Charlie Van Dyke here with the WLS memory about the incredible coverage of the 50,000 watt station. It was a cold, dark winter morning, a little after 5. The phone call came from the tower at O'Hare, telling me that a pilot wanted to talk to me. So they set up the two-way conversation. Pilot said he was the captain of a charter flight of Chicago people, and they were about to wake everybody up for breakfast. WLS was coming in loud and clear when I played a dedication to the flight. They were going to pipe the audio into the cabin. Well, sure. Got the flight number, agreed to wait about 10 minutes until everybody was awake. I said, okay. And then he said, well, don't you want to know where I am? Well, yeah, sure. He said, 32,000 feet over Iceland. Now that's a long-distance dedication.
WLS.
And Charlie Van Dyke still has those great pipes, doesn't he, Jim?
Yes, he does.
Well, you do, too.
Yeah, but well, the thing is, you know, I'm from Michigan, and you know, it's not like as far away as Iceland, but it was a different place from Chicago. I'm from Detroit. You know, we had our own identity, we had our own local music hits and our own big DJs. But the big, powerful signal of WLS would come, you know, just blasting in there at night. And like a lot of kids, I loved turning the radio to the big 89. And when I was in junior high, it was after the days of Clark Webber and Ron Riley and Dex Card and Art Roberts. When I listened to WLS at night, I was listening to Chuck Buell, and I was listening to Chris Stevens. And I was so excited to meet Chuck Buell tonight. I want to hear him on the air.
Oh, we could hear him right now. Should we do that? Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Chuck Buell Show on your much more music station.
89 WLS.
802 LS, more music time on the all-new Chuck Buell Show from the Big 89. Talk to me, Aretha. Chick says it like she feels it. Aretha Franklin, you gotta think, babe.
89 WLS plays more music.
Bring this one on home one time. Heavyweight hit coming on.
Things go better with Coca-Cola when you're talking it over.
Sandy Posey drinks Coke after Coke.
Chuck Buell, 89 WLS.
Now I'm a U.S. mail. Ladies
Chuck Buell. You and music.
WLS. I've got 8:02 here at WLS. What time do you have where you are? Neil Diamond, honey. Oh, my. Calling your name. Shiloh, dig it. Shiloh, when I was young, I used to... That's such a great song. That's Neil Diamond at Shiloh with Chuck Buell at WLS. Cold night. Wow, I'm going to be so glad. I got a level. I'm going to be so glad when the warmer weather comes. Boy, I'm getting tired of this stuff. Friday night at the Edison Light in South Bend. You know where that is. The Rugbies will be there. Rugbies, they sang groovy stuff. Advanced ticket sales at the Pit Stop. That's on Miracle Lane. And also at Mail M1. It's the Rugbies, Edison Light, South Bend, Friday night. Be there.
Airport. It comes roaring at you with a
89 WLS. Operator 1. More music, WLS.
Chuck Buell, Pisces Power, baby. WLS is 810 at the Big 89. That's the most music time. Saluting the Tomcats, Aurora East. Part of the Elite Eight. They meet Peoria Spalding Friday night. Get into the quarterfinal games, man. Dig this song. Little sister, you're the one. Oh, that song gets right down inside of me and does something. Oh, and what it does. Little sister, you're the one with Chuck Buell at WLS. Aha! Time for another episode with Mutt and Jess. Blair, that honey I saw you with the other day, you've got yourself a winner. Yeah, Chuck and Levi, some Litton's Pant Pit, you just can't keep them away from you.
89 WLS.
You know, Jim, you were right. That dude is smooth. Wow. Man. All right. I know we were going to talk about engineers, but I want to ask you a question about that because, you know, when you and Chris Eric Stevens got here, you were the new guard. I mean, the first wave was the Swingin' 7. Then afterwards, Ron and Art came in, and you two were the young guys. And if you remember, that whole ad campaign was really around that. You know, it's more fun when you're young, and you really changed the sound and the complexion of the radio station.
And that was the whole goal of it, too, is to do exactly what that was, which is why they promoted so much in that youth type of thing. And our energy level was a lot higher. And in talking about some of the engineers, now those engineers had been there forever. I mean, really, some long-term people. I remember one music spinner. He was a member of the Musicians Union, had been there.
Carl Davis.
Carl Davis.
Yes, the Colonel.
Yeah, and he used to tell me how he was on Barn Dance with Gene Autry.
Yeah, he was a member of the Cumberland Ridge Runners.
Yes, he was, and just a super nice guy.
But a good friend of Pat Boone, too.
Yeah, and he spent a lot of time singing with Lula Bell.
Yeah. Right, Lulu Bell and Scotty. Yeah. And Tommy, I was going to say, wasn't that how you guys were able to put that together with Debbie Boone when the whole "You Light Up My Life" was going on?
Sure.
Was that a connection there with Carl?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Carl was just one of the things that amazed me was when different stars would come in so we could record for music people. You know, the interview show we did. And I would usher them into Studio B, and I'd introduce them. This is Al Rosen, our engineer, and this is Carl Davis. And they'd go, you're the real Carl Davis? Are you serious? Yeah. The Kentucky Colonel, Carl Davis? Yes. They would go nuts because of the history with that man. And he was the record turner. I mean, originally he was with his buddy, and they were on the air together. Carl and Hardy. Mm-hmm. But after that, he was a member of the union that was the only group of people that could touch turntables and put needles on records and all that stuff. I mean, we had so many unions at the radio station. That was one of them. Another union would manage the equipment. Another union would be the people with the voices. And another one would be one that Catherine can tell you about, that they could...
They wrote copy.
Yeah.
And they took our recording from when we phoned in from City Hall with a live report.
Right. And if you wrote a story and somebody else like Linda Marshall is going to use it later... The NABED person had to actually
go through them.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, should we go back to Carl Davis?
Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing that we would do in the production studio. And one day, and John Landecker would always call, not always call, but whenever he called, he'd say, "Hey, guys, can you give me like an hour?" I said, "An hour?" "Yeah," because we were always very busy. And we'd say, "What do you got?" And he said, I've got a bit. I'm working on a bit." We know what that means. So we say, "Okay, what time are you going to be here?" And he would be there in the afternoon, and we would start working on something. And he would start to tell us what it was all about. And we said, "Okay, what do you want us to do? We'll do anything you want." And Al Rosen, who was the production engineer, would get all of the material. Now, this is long before digital, long before working with computers and everything. This is reel-to-reel tape and cartridge tape, and the colonel in the other room with putting needles on record albums and stuff like that. And so John Landecker would come up with special bits, and that's what we would work on. And we would work on it and probably get it done in a day, maybe 2 days. But when you finally heard what John Landecker did, the radio station showed you it was not only what the personalities did on the music, it's what they did between the songs.
And it was a collaborative effort. You all were involved.
All of our voices, too, yeah.